right, welcome back, everybody, to episode 39 of the Content Lab podcast. We are back after 8 months of hiatus. I decided that it was time to come back. I got a team together now, which I want to shout out before we start everything. So shout out to PC, which is right here in the background, producing the podcast. Patrick, should I mention the his name, or he wants to stay anonymous?
Anonymous.
Okay, anonymous number two, Iron and Castle. That's his Instagram. That's how he likes to go by. And Chad helped a lot too. Chad Mueller. So I appreciate everybody that supported the podcast to make it back. And we had to start with a bang. So we have Evan Bourcier for episode 39. Thank you so much for joining us.
Dude, thanks for having me. Hopefully I can provide the bang.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the reasons why I was thinking about you as the first episode back, first because I feel like there's a lot that I want to like learn about you. You post a lot on Instagram, and it's things that I resonate a lot with, and I was like, he'll be perfect for a few reasons. Why? One, because obviously you're very experienced. You've had a lot of you know uh, cool experiences, shoots, and everything in the industry. But second, I want to like learn from you too, and I'm sure like everybody listening is gonna learn a lot too.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited to share whatever I can. It's been a pretty wild journey, honestly. Like just going from knowing nothing about any of this stuff to feeling like I was on just like rocket to the moon type stuff, and then blew my life up a little bit, and then been rebuilding. So it'll be a fun chat.
Oh yeah, for sure. So you mentioned that you've always been creative, right? Like growing up, you were into art stuff, like painting,
Yeah.
um, or you wanted to be like a pilot too. You said.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, so I have this feeling that I think everyone is creative and that some people just lose it, right? Like I think kids are fundamentally creative. And I definitely experience that a lot. Just super curious, that natural creativity that comes with play and curiosity, right? And so I would draw little comic book things when I was little. I would go to Barnes and Noble and just like get those crazy like cutout drawing Star Wars books that have like here's how a pod racer works or whatever. And I was always obsessed with that world building and this idea of like how do people come up with this stuff, and wanting to learn how to use my imagination to create things. And for some reason I was obsessed with like the experience of flying, and just that intersection of like art and science that I feel like is inherent to something like that was really resonant with me at a young age. I mean, I think pilots are fundamentally cool. And so when I was like, I don't know, probably like 7 or 8, we used to live in upstate New York, and I would go to our big like regional library, and I would just take like every World War II book they had, to the point that I had read everything that the library had, and they were like, who is this kid that's like reading these like very adult research volumes on like World War II aerial engineering and stuff. But yeah, I loved art, painting, music videos. I always struggled honestly with like the discipline of practicing any of those things. And so, I had an aspirational interest, but like drawing, I always felt like I had bad hand-eye coordination. Like my handwriting has never been really pretty. Drawing, I was always sort of self-conscious about like I feel like I can't do these really, clean line art stuff or whatever else. And so I ended up doing it and then sort of fading out of it because I felt like I wasn't good at it. And similarly, like I got guitar lessons when I was really little, and really got set up for success there, but just wasn't feeling the connection to it. And so, I probably did it for a few months and then fell away and didn't end up coming back into it until I was 16. And that was where I felt like there was a sense of ownership and connection to music. And I feel like that's something that I've had to learn to be like kind to myself with, is one, those feelings of like, oh, I feel like I can't currently do what I want to do, or like the way that things naturally come out of me doesn't look like the things that I most aspire to, and that sometimes it's easy to get in my head and go like, oh, so I shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right? Like if my drawings don't look like those drawings, then I shouldn't draw. Or if my music doesn't sound like that music, then I shouldn't make music. Um,
Do you ever
and
run through those thoughts as a filmmaker?
oh, 100%. I mean, I think those thoughts are for me they're the hardest part of the whole process, right? Because it's like the the act of creating, I believe, is fundamentally easy. Like when you're doing it, it's just happening, and it is what it is. The times that it gets hard are when your mind pulls up all these things that's like, oh, well, it should be here and it's here. And now it feels hard because I don't know how to get from here to here, right? Um, and so coming back into that place of like, this is just where we are right now. This is what we're making right now. And not following your mind down all the rabbit trails of like, oh, but this guy does this, or this has all these deep metaphors and I don't know how to make deep metaphors or whatever else. Cause like all of those mind spirals just take you out of the flow of creating. Um,
Absolutely.
and
And I see it happening a lot, especially in our world.
oh,
It's a
totally.
yeah.
Well, and I think it's hard, it was hard as a kid, to be honest, like, because you can sometimes get picked on, people say whatever they do about your work, and you take all of that very personally. And I think that's part of what pulled me out of a lot of things. Like,
Mm.
I specifically remember I really wanted to sing when I was younger, and I had no experience with singing. And I sang in front of people a few times who were all like, that's really bad. And for the next like 20 years, I would never sing in front of anyone ever again. And then just the last few months, I went and started taking vocal lessons with a
I
friend
saw it.
who
That's
was
cool.
on The Voice, and it's been super fun. But it's like
Yeah.
um, the act of just re-exploring it. It's like, oh, this is fine. This is fun. This is what it is, and I don't have to compare myself to Adele or whoever else. But I think
Absolutely.
in the same way, it can be very difficult because the natural state of where we are culturally right now with creativity is that the default perception is that it's kind of a popularity content contest on social media, and that falling into that to me just pulls me back into all of the thought spirals and pulls me
Yeah.
back into the, well, how do I do this to get people's attention, and do I make what I want to do or what people want to see, do I play what seems to be the algorithm game, do I do this or do I do whatever else, and being able to just pull out of that for a second and go like, I don't know that any of these like crazy thought spirals are helping me right now. It's not making it fun. And so for me, I've really had to come back to just like doing things that feel good and letting the mind game of it all fall away. But it's simultaneously like the easiest thing and the hardest thing to do. Because when you're stuck in that way of thinking, it's really hard to get out of it. And then once you get back to just like creating for fun, it's like, oh, this is just
Yeah.
fun. Like I just never had to play that game if I didn't want to.
It's funny that you mentioned that everybody's born with like some level of creativity because me growing up, like when I was a kid, I was like that. I will draw a lot. That's what I like doing. I remember I had in my room growing up, I had a white wall, and I told my mom because I mean I was like 8, 9 years old. I was into like skating and like music videos, MTV, and all that. And I see people like doing graffitis and stuff. I'm like, hey mom, can I just like draw on my wall? And she's like, what are you gonna say, a kid that's like 8 to 9? Sure, yeah, do it. And
Yeah.
that's what I'll do all day, just draw on my wall, like draw things. I was like a very creative kid. I would play guitar until I was like, I mean, I started lessons when I was like 9. So music was always a part of me, and creativity and drawing and doing all these things that just kind of, like those skills that are very creative. And for some reason, um, I think from 13 through my 20s, I think I really didn't touch in any of those skills ever. Like in my mind, like I transitioned more into the sports part of it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I was doing sports. I was playing golf, soccer, tennis, all these sports, and I completely forgot about drawing and music and just exploring that part of me. That's like what, like, you could say the most natural part of me, which is the first thing that I did when growing up. and in my head I thought I wasn't a creative person because I just like forgot about that. And when I was like 18, yeah, I'm not really creative. I'm gonna go to business school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do anything that's like more with like art and stuff. I'm just gonna go to business school. That's where my head was at. That I thought I was gonna be like, I don't know, like something related to business, which in some ways, of course, like we own a business, so yes, but in a completely different way. And it wasn't until like my 20s that I started exploring creativity again, and it just it just feels right, you know, like when things feel right. And thinking about that, like you mentioned that when when you were 18 is the first time that you touched the camera, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how was that process? And if you can also touch on the um you didn't go to college, was that purposely because you wanted to focus on photography, or you had, or since like you were young you were like, I don't want to do this?
Yeah. So when I was probably, I don't know, I feel like I'm so bad with chronology, but like when I was probably 7 or 8, I remember there was a brief phase in there that I got super curious about photography. And this was like a big pattern in my life that I would find something I was interested in and I would just like learn everything I possibly could about it, despite having like no actual access to the thing, right? Like I was a kid with no money and I would be like, how do you learn how to like be a I got super into paintball for a while. And I don't know that I ever actually played paintball, but I like knew everything about all the different ways that paintball guns worked. And so there was a period where I was like reading all these photography magazines and just really drawn to like the perspective and the beauty of it all. Um, and I think I ended up, my parents got me some like Nikon Cool Pix or something. And I don't remember the details, but if I had to guess, I think that I like played with it for a month and quickly felt like none of this feels like the stuff that I love, and so I'm just gonna not do that. Which I think is a very common experience with like consumer level cameras and lenses too. Like my biggest thing for people is like don't go get some like crappy zoom lens and then think you're a bad photographer because like your camera's shooting at 2000 ISO, everything's noisy as hell. Like you just can't, you can make good
I
things with
always
that,
say
but
the same
it'll ruin it so quickly for you.
for sure, because then you
uh,
start comparing yourself with people with, you know, $5,000 cameras, $30,000 lenses. You're like, wait, why is it so much crispier?
Right. And you don't know the difference, right? It's like I didn't know how much of a difference, you know, even I remember when I first actually started out, like I went from the like 18 to 55 Canon to like a nifty 50 and was like, "Oh, now depth of field is a whole new game." And then going from like a nifty 50 just to the 50 1.4, going like, "Oh, sharpness is a thing that like I didn't realize didn't exist in this little $100 lens." Um so anyway, yeah, to quickly go back, so briefly was fascinated with photography, didn't really fully commit to it or dive into it, didn't understand what wasn't working, left it. And around that time was or around the time I was 16, through a friend on Facebook, I remember I there was this kid I knew who had this like crazy profile picture of like him with like a elk's head or something. And I was like, how the heck did you do that? And he was like, oh, I use Photoshop. And I was like, what's Photoshop? And he sent me a like Pirate Bay crack for Photoshop back when all the Adobe stuff was like $3,000 for Photoshop and $4,000 for Premiere. This was like pre-Creative Cloud. And so there were these like keygen things that you could use to basically hack Adobe software. And so Photoshop was like a whole new world for me because it was like, oh, I can be super creative in a way that feels visually coherent. Like it's not dependent on my drawing skill. It's not dependent on me having this kind of camera. I can make the things that I feel like are resonant. And so I got super obsessed with like digital art, photo manipulation type stuff. And I almost went to college for that. So I started doing little like freelance jobs in sort of like graphic design, digital art world. And to be honest, I was like, I don't really like the like illustration, logo, print design side of this. I really like making things that, you know, it was like 5 gum billboards and stuff back in the day. That was just this like weird intersectional sort of like reality and CGI stuff. And my experience with design was also that like it felt like the art form where every client thinks they're an expert in it, and so they'll just like give you totally uneducated notes on everything, and I just got super frustrated with that. But I applied to go to Full Sail, so I was homeschooled my whole life. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And an important part of that story is also that around the time that I was like 11 or 12, my parents separated. And that ended up being this like big messy thing that like their divorce wasn't finalized until I was 18. And so that put a lot of tension in my life with just like sort of, you know, taking on that like man of the house role, having to take care of my siblings, having a lot of like fear and anxiety around money and stuff because it was a big mess. And so like I remember, you know, pulling quarters out of the couch to like go get gas, and it was just things were super tight, and that was another period where I was really curious about all these things. That was when the paintball thing happened, but like I didn't have any money to go play paintball. I didn't have any money to go snowboarding or anything. And so I had always wanted to go pursue these experiences and to create more things, but felt like there were all these obstacles in my life. And felt all of this sort of emotional need to be really close to my family too. So I wanted to go to an arts college. I looked at a few. I really wanted, part of me really wanted to go somewhere far away. Like I was looking at like schools in Hawaii and Australia and stuff. But sort of the way fate took it, I ended up getting involved with a church down on Cape Cod, which is like 2 hours from where I lived at the time. And really connected with some people there in the music space and the design space. And basically they were like, hey, would you want to come like intern and work with us? And there was a living opportunity there where there was like a totally finished basement apartment with the guy who ran the creative team. And he was like, would love to have you come live with us. And so like at this point, again, like money was so tight. I got $1,000 loan from my grandmother to buy a 1986 Honda VFR, which is this like pseudo sport cruiser motorcycle, and like spray painted it and put stickers all over it. But like I was using that to go back and forth to like work at a pizza restaurant that summer just to like make any sort of money. And I'm like paying my grandma back. So I would take my bike down to the Cape. And I was a moderate hooligan on that thing where I would run my Strava and try and like set time records for how quickly I could get to the Cape, which gave my mom so much anxiety. But basically it was like all the things started coming together, and I was like, I think I'm just going to move to the Cape. It was right around my 18th birthday. It might have been the day of my 18th birthday, because I remember we were celebrating with friends. I was down on the Cape that I got the news that my parents' divorce had been finalized. And so there was this sense that like, okay, a little bit of this like chaos that's going on, like maybe I can take a little bit of space. So I ended up saying, yeah, I'm going to move to the Cape. And that week I left my house in Western Massachusetts and was driving on the back roads to get to the highway, and came around a corner and there was a construction truck backing out into the middle of the road, blocking the road. Ironically, I had just replaced the rear calipers on my bike because they had been like not operating properly. And some combination of probably me freaking out, rear brakes being way more sensitive than I expected, and there being sand on the road because it was like spring in New England, locked up the rear tire, bike goes off in the woods. I slide like 100 feet on my hip, and it all just happens in like the blink of an eye. And I remember, you know, you're just like riding, and then all of a sudden you're on the ground. And I remember getting up and just being like, I'm going to be late for my meeting. And then being like, do I have all my limbs still? And looked down, and like I had worn through my gloves and just like scratched my hand, but had no real damage to my hand. My right shoe was gone, and my right sock had been like shredded, but my foot was fine. I ended up having a mean bruise where I hit the pavement. I had a ding in my helmet where my head had bounced, and but I was fine, thankfully. And so that was a curveball, because now it's like, well, now I have to figure out how to move, and I lost my one mode of transportation. And so we ended up going around and, long story short, finding this like old Toyota Celica that I think we paid like $4,000 for or something, and being like, okay, so my first car is a stick now. I'm literally out with my mom learning to drive stick the day before I have to move to the Cape to start my job. And it was just like chaos again. But
Yeah.
I moved down there. I'm working at Marshall's and an Ace Hardware. And to make a long story short, end up getting asked if I would want to edit some stuff for this church. I was like, yeah, I don't know anything about video editing, but sure, why not? So I went into their office and they had Final Cut 7 at the time. We made these like Christmas church service videos, and that led to my mom being like, I want to get you a camera for Christmas. She bought me a Canon T3i, and that was basically like, okay, I'm not doing any of this other stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Like I quit my jobs at Marshall's and Ace Hardware. I was super low overhead and used to not having money anyway. So I would just do like senior shoots and engagement shoots for $50 or whatever. Like, but I was just like, the leverage on this is already so much better than like working minimum wage retail. It's so much more fun. And I felt like I could just feel all the opportunity. And so that was the commitment to like, I'm just going to figure this out despite not knowing literally anything about it. And at this point, that was 12 years ago and haven't looked back yet. So it's been crazy.
I feel like a lot of us get to that's how we like get started in this industry. We pretty much just like commit to it. Like, this is what I'm gonna do, and there's no way to, stop from here.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I got started too. It just pretty much end up with a camera, and I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do, and I'm not gonna stop now. So from that moment forward, was it like the first few years were like rough, trying to like get bigger gigs? Like how was that experience until to a point? And if you can also touch into like the time of your life that you feel that it's kind of, that was the moment that you're like, wow, there is something really special here, and have a special gift, and it's time from now on to go straight up.
Yeah. So I got that camera on Christmas. And a few weeks later, we went down to this conference in Atlanta that was like sort of this like college, another like church related thing called Passion. And I was just like taking pictures. I'm figuring out how to work everything still. I'm like, how do the buttons work on this thing? What's an aperture? And there was this one night that they did this big like candlelight vigil thing outside the Superdome, or I don't know if it was a Superdome at the time, but long story short, there's like 40,000 college kids out with all these candles, and they're singing and stuff. And I was like, I'm just going to film this event. So I start filming stuff, and it's like the next day we're driving home. And at this point I downloaded a trial of Adobe Premiere because I couldn't afford Adobe Premiere. And I'm cutting this thing and have no clue what I'm doing. I'm just sort of slapping it together. I used a song that I like ripped off a CD that I got at the event, and I throw it up on YouTube and didn't really think anything of it. And within like the next 48 hours, I guess that video was like the first video that went up on YouTube around the event. Like, and so like CNN or some of these other news places picked it up, and it ended up getting like 16,000 views or something, which at that time was a lot. And that was the moment for me, honestly, of just being like, oh, this could be something, like seeing something that you made in like a blog article on a major news site and then seeing thousands of people see it. That was the moment that I actually was like, I'm going home and quitting my job at Marshall's right now. Like,
Yeah.
I can make this work. And from there, I mean, I guess you could say it's hard. I don't know that it really felt hard though. Like, I think in the moment, again, if you're not in the comparison mind game, it's like, this is magic. Like, people call me and give me $300 to make something. Like, this
Yeah.
is so much better than what I was doing before. And, I remember sitting there being like, why would anyone ever spend $1,000 for a lens? How do people get all this money? Like, it was all mind blowing to me, just the scale and cost of it all. But yeah, I was just like, I'm going to go make stuff for our church. And just showing up and making things and finding ways to be creative, like it quickly led to opportunities where like 6 months in, I got invited to go to Haiti for 2 weeks and
Wow.
do a bunch of photo and documentary work down there with a nonprofit. That stuff won Telly Awards. The first wedding that I ever did, I did for like $200. I had my brother come second shoot who knew nothing about anything related to video production. And like I spent the whole $200 on rental stuff from Lens Pro to go. But that first wedding video went to the admissions department at Massachusetts Maritime Academy, which was like 20 minutes from where I lived at the time. And I get an email from their marketing director that's like, hey, we want to talk to you about doing stuff for our school. And so I remember I'm like, I've got the jitters at that point, when you get an email and you're just like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do about this. I don't know anything about commercial stuff. I don't know anything about anything. And thankfully, this lady, Angela, she was like an angel. She was probably my saving grace with actually like making it in at all, because she came in and she was like, we've used people in the past. They're super expensive. Their stuff's not good. We love what you're doing. We want to hire you. And she's like, what would you charge? And I was like, I honestly have no clue. And she definitely could have taken advantage of me at that point. And she was like, well, the last people we hired charged $100 an hour and you're better than that. So how about we just do $100 an hour? And inside I'm like freaking out again. Cause I
Yeah.
was like, I used to make like $300 a week working at Marshall's. Like what in the world is any of this? And so I'm like, yeah, I think I can make that work. And you're like walking back to the car, just like walking on air, going like, this is magic. Um, and then I had to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with these guys? And just continually learning and having stuff that really works, finding things that really resonate, and always trying to push to make things better. But like I went to this event called Masters in Motion. It was about a year after I got the camera, and I was going there because back in this time, it was like Philip Bloom was really big. I don't know if you've ever seen Philip Bloom. He's like a old school filmmaking YouTuber, but he was one of
I
the
don't think I
big,
have.
like, he's like British and films his cats a lot. um,
Yeah.
but he was doing a lot of stuff at the time with like DSLR video and talking about picture profile settings and all this stuff, because like these cameras didn't have log, they didn't have 24 frames per second, like they had all sorts of janky stuff. And so I wanted to go learn from him.
How many
And
years ago was that?
this would have been 2011 or
Okay. Yeah. So
2012.
12, 13
Um,
years ago.
yeah. And so um, he was like, I'm the only thing I'm doing in America is going to be this event called Masters in Motion. And it was like $1,000 ticket. Flights and hotel, I think, were like another $1,500. And I was basically like, I'm just going to take all the money I've saved and I'm going to go to this event. And they had people from National Geographic and Discovery Channel and all this stuff. And I was like, that's a world that I really want to be in. And so I know that the stuff I'm doing is really cool right now, but I know there's even cooler stuff out there. And I just need to figure out how to get into that room. So I show up to Masters in Motion, and I was Philip Bloom, not Richard Bloom. I don't know who this guy is.
I'm not a good photographer.
Yeah, it looks great. But so I show up to this event as a 19-year-old, and I'm immediately meeting all these people. You're like at a mixer, and they're like, oh, I'm a cinematographer for this production company. And the guy's like, I'm a producer for National Geographic. I'm a, AC. What do you do? And I was like, I don't know what any of this means. Like, what? It's all Greek to me, I just like make videos. And yeah, that's Philip Bloom. He's awesome.
Nice.
Highly recommend. But he was like the original film YouTuber, to be honest. Like I think there's all the cool people now, but Philip Bloom was reviewing
Coaching.
gear and talking about picture profiles and all this stuff 13 years ago and comparing cameras. So
Where's the
he's
cats?
a original gangster.
Nice.
But yeah, so that moment of being, again, sort of like totally overwhelmed and going, I don't know how any of this stuff works, but I'm just going to learn and I'm just going to show up. And I just started offering to help at the event a lot. The people running the event sort of had to take care of me, because since I was under 21, they had to like find ways to sneak me into all the like there were sort of these like hangouts. They weren't really parties, but everyone would like go out to bars after all the workshops that day. And so they would have to be like, hey, he's with our event, can you let him in, whatever else. And I just started offering to help them, and got connected to all these incredible people through that. People that, you know, objectively I probably had no business being in the room with, but was just immediately learning. That's where I met the people who owned Lens Pro to Go. And that event, I think it was the next year, was when the guys at Lens Pro were like, hey, would you be interested in doing content for us? And I was like, you know, what would that look like? And they were like, well, we get all this new gear and all the time. We would love for someone to sort of test it out, review it, whatever else. And we feel like you'd be a good person for it. And they were like, basically the way it would work originally, I think I was supposed to like bill them hourly, but I've always hated tracking time, and so I just never invoiced them for anything. But they were like, we'll put you on as an employee, you'll get an employee account, and you just have total access to our gear inventory. And so I could just go to the rental house and just take whatever I wanted all the time, which at this point I had just been like saving up to rent Canon 60s for projects. And it's like, okay, here's a C300 Mark II, here's Cinema Primes, here's, you know, Kino Flows. And so that was like kid in the candy shop moment of honestly still working on things that there often wasn't a lot of money on. Like there were moments where like the Mass Maritime stuff would be a big payday or whatever, but then I'd go shoot a bunch of these like one-shot acoustic performance videos for $500 for a batch of 8 of them, and I'd pay someone $200 to mix them, and like, you know, I'm like not making any money on this stuff, but it wasn't really costing me any money either, since I was able to take all the gear. And so I was like, I'm just going to sink all the money in to keep making good stuff. And so yeah, it somehow that led to the point where I made enough of this like direct to client stuff that looked good that people started calling me to shoot stuff for them. And that was when I first got exposed to like the DP path, and started shooting stuff for like ESPN and other agencies and whatever else. And at this point I was probably like 20, 21. Like it was pretty quick.
Wow. Yeah, that's fast.
Yeah.
Just a few years.
Yeah. It was like I feel like it was like 4 or 5 years total to be to where like I was DPing like 6-figure commercial projects with like big crews, and I was just like, how in the world did this happen? Like it was really surreal. And honestly, a lot of the time was like I was the youngest person on the crew and having to like be in charge, which was always a weird dynamic. But it blew up really quick, and like the Lens Pro stuff blew up the audience really quick. So like next thing I knew, I had 15,000 Instagram followers or whatever it was, and I was getting gear sponsorship offers. And you know, I'd started this filmmaking community which went from like 20 high school kids to 5,000 members, and was getting asked to speak at panels at NAB and Able Cine and all this stuff. And so it was honestly surreal, just like how quickly
young 20s.
Yeah, how quickly it went from like knowing literally nothing and never having been in this space to feeling really just like an integrated part of the whole space. Yeah, it's one of those things that I just can't explain. Like I don't have any tips or tricks for that outside of just like showing up.
I mean, I 100% feel you in that. Like sometimes it's just tough to say like, how did this happen, right? It just happened. But here's the thing. Well, first, let's backtrack a little bit. Whenever you start saying that, whenever you start getting your first gigs and it felt like magic, like, oh my God, somebody's going to pay me. Dude, that I miss those days so much, because it was such true passion for what I was doing that every time I got paid, it just felt like, why did I get paid? I love doing this. Like, do I even have to like it's I really miss those days, and I go back a lot because sometimes I get in this like feeling of like I'm doing a lot of the similar gigs back to back, and I kind of feel like I'm losing my creativity. And then I have to like make myself go back to those like first few years or first few months of like me starting to get jobs, and that passion of just like trying to learn new things every day, just asking people questions, making connections. Then somebody asking you, hey, can you take some photos of me and my wife? Sure, I'll take some photos of you and your wife. And then they pay you $100, and you're like, wait, what? I'm making $15 an hour coaching across the class, and I just spent 30 minutes and they paid me $100. And in my mind, that's like, you know, the best thing that could have ever happened. And I often go back to those days to remind myself uh, all those things. Same thing with like the gear. Like I used to look at a B&H and look at the lenses, and I'll be like, gosh, I wish that one day I could, afford those lenses. And now we're in a spot that it's easier for us just to go, oh yeah, the new lens got released, you order it, and then you kind of lost track of like everything you've worked on to get to this point and how it felt before to like look at other creators or people using those lenses and being like, like you know that if you work to a point that you're working hard, you can get to that point. So going back to those days are like my favorite.
Yeah.
And the second thing I wanted to talk about is that you mentioned, I don't know how I got all these opportunities. Like, I don't know how I got here, but there is something that I feel like it's like the common denominator and on everybody that gets to that point. And it's two things that you mentioned. You mentioned that they really liked you, and it's something that you didn't say it as like, oh yeah, that's why they hired me. But you mentioned a few times, you were talking about like, yeah, well, I started making connections with these people and they really liked me. They really like what I was doing. And I feel like there's such a there's such a thing about like just having that good energy around you,
Mm-hmm.
being nice to people, like people feeling that like like being comfortable around you and feeling like you're a positive mind around them. You're a positive, you're obviously, this is not taking anything from how creative you are, how talented you are. But I always say that people buy into people that more people buy into product. I feel like people buy into people way more. Like your
Right.
product has to be good, of course. Like if your product's not up to par, but at the same time, I feel like there is hundreds of people that can do what we do, right? There is another, they probably have another few options that can do a great job like the one that you're doing, but they're buying into the person that you are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I see as a common denominator on everybody that's successful, especially at a young age, is that they're really good people. They're really good at making connections, respectful, just that positive energy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think the ability to be legitimately curious about other people, and to want to understand is such a valuable skill, especially in a world where there is a lot of just like chest thumping, knowledge bragging sort of stuff. That I do think that was a big part of the magic for me, is like I had no ego about it and was just like, I just want to understand this and I want to bring myself to it, without any preconceived notions. And the ability to do that and to even go into client meetings, and like, it's only more recently that I've realized that like in all those early meetings, I didn't really like talk about creative a whole ton. I didn't really talk about gear a whole ton. Like we would talk about, me wanting to understand the client's thing, whatever it was, whether it was like we did a watch company thing with a Lamborghini Aventador, we would do something with Mass Maritime Academy with their, marine engineering degree. And that was where the like, my inner little nerdy homeschooled kid just coming out and being like, I want to understand everything about this. I want to understand what you do. I want to understand how these systems work. I want to understand how it benefits people. My experience was that when people see that you are creatively competent, because that's usually sort of obvious, right? It's like either the stuff you're making feels resonant or it doesn't. But then when they see that you also are taking the time to like understand what's going on, there's so much more trust there than when you come in and are like, here's all the crazy fancy creative stuff I want to do and here's why I need a bunch of money. And they're like, I don't know if
Yeah.
you even understand what we do. I don't know if you understand what we're trying to do here. And so that's like a little thing that I've realized more now, mostly as I've seen other people go about it different ways, that it's like, I don't really believe in leading with here's all our big toys and tricks and whatever else. It's like, I want to understand you, understand what we're trying to do. I want to share perspective on it. And then just, approach it with here's what we need, and like that was one of the things that led me to, I don't know. I think it was like 2016 or something. I got called by another college, called Clark University, and they're like, we want to do this admissions film, and we want it to feel really fresh. We don't want it to feel stale. And I was like, okay, here's what I would do. Like, we should shoot mixed format. We're going to shoot 16 millimeter film. We're going to shoot all this, like, we were using a lot of like festival films as references. And they were like, okay, here's $46,000. Go figure it out. And I was like, that was another, just like, I walked out of that room with my jaw on the floor and was just like, this is a crazy amount of money to figure anything out. But like, I don't know. It was funny because I almost had this insecurity that like on the backside, they were like, oh, our billing department like needs this like contract and scope of work and whatever. And I was like, I don't even know what any of that is or how to do any of that. Like, I just make things, man, you know? And I think that like, it's really easy to get caught up in that stuff and feeling like, oh, I need to have all these other ducks in a row to like make something bigger or better. I need to have all these systems. And I mean, those things evolve naturally. Like, you're going to learn, but even in those moments, I think being able to be relatively honest, you know, I think there's a little bit of like, you have to just be confident and go like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. But there's also a little bit of going like, I don't know what that is. Can like, I know what I know. I don't know what that is. Can you just help me with that? That also just increases the trust factor, that you're like, just being straight up with like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't love that idea. Here's what seems like it might not make sense there. And I've seen a lot of other people who can come into a space and feel like they have to have the biggest and best ideas. They have to agree with everything the client says. They have to pretend to know everything. And one, those projects rarely end up good. And two, those people rarely end up building good relationships. And so like, I just treat my work relationships like any other relationships. And even like, I remember early on, I was working with another guy who was like, oh, we have to like show up in button down shirts and khakis because we're professionals or whatever. And like, I believed it for like a week. And then I was like, this just doesn't feel right. Like, I'm not doing this, you know, I'm going to show up as myself. I'm going to talk as myself. Like, I'm not putting on this business person shtick. And that has worked out well for me. So
that's
just
great.
Being yourself.
And being yourself, that's great. And I feel like one of the reasons why a lot of people also feel that like connection or resonate with you is because of how open you are about your emotions, how vulnerable you are. Give me a second.
You're good.
Okay, good. How open you are about your feelings and how vulnerable you are online, right? And I mean, Patrick, if you can pull that picture right there, there's things like this that I see on your Instagram all the time. You talk a lot about your past, like, you know, about the way that you see things, the way that you feel things, that you feel things harder and that other people. And I feel like you just express your feelings a lot more than other people. And people really feel that connection, because I feel like we are all the same, but we all like express our emotions in a different way. So whenever you have somebody that's like successful and they're like openly talking about, you know, gaining weight and having a tough relationship, or like being in parts of your life that you were not happy, we're all like, well, yeah, like we feel that, right? Like, but that's why a lot of people, I feel like, or at least in my own experience, that's why every time you post something, I really like pay attention to it, because I feel like you're really open and you it's just easy to feel what's the word I'm looking for? Well, yeah, like to feel that connection with you and posts like this. And actually, the very first time that I heard about you is Patrick. I think I also sent you the link about this one. It's the Matt Fraser one.
Which Matt Fraser one?
Patrick's gonna pull it up real quick.
Okay. Oh yeah.
But that's the very first time that I heard anything from you. I saw this video.
So this is March of 2018. This is a few weeks after starting my sort of fitness journey.
You look bigger.
Wait, dude.
Wait, that's you?
That's me. That's 100% me.
Oh my god.
True story. I was digging around YouTube looking for fitness stuff.
Beer.
And I found a video that these guys did of you snatching 300 pounds. And I was like, I should try this CrossFit stuff.
No shit.
This is a year later.
You did that in a year?
This is July 2019, so like 15 months. This is August of 2019. That was the loop for me.
No shit. I didn't realize that. Hey, that's impressive.
Dude, you literally set me on a path, so it's really weird to be here now.
That's incredible.
So obviously that's like one of the best videos you're ever gonna see on social media. And there's a few things that I find interesting, because the first one is that you mentioned that the way you found CrossFit is because you watched a video by Hero and Mars.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly the way I found CrossFit. I saw one of the movies that they made, and I was like, I think that was 2015, and I was like, I need to try this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I really want to try this. And obviously, starting doing the sport and seeing these people like Matt Fraser and Rich Froning and all these people, and then getting to the point that I'm working with them, it's just like a full loop, experience. Like, well, like how like life works out in crazy ways.
Yeah.
But it just very cool how like Matt Fraser like set you up for that path of like health and fitness, and then a few years after you were making videos with him and working with him. um and I mean, yeah, you can talk to me about that experience, but I also wanted to go straight into the the part that I feel like a lot of us struggle, and I personally struggle a lot, is when I started getting successful and when I started getting more busy, I forgot about essential things in my life, which is like health, eating better, even my personal relationship with my significant other at the time. I I got so consumed by this whole idea of like me having to work all the time, having to chase money, and I forgot about those things that I feel like it's so important to obviously like being healthy. And obviously I gained some weight. I stopped doing things that I love doing because I was always, as I said, consumed about making money. I started even losing some of the passion that I had about this job because I started seeing it too much of my career, my job, and I completely forgot about like the things that made me start doing this. And yeah, my relationship too. Like I mean, I could say that I put that in like the in a not as important because I was doing all these things. And I've seen some of your videos talking about that. So I mean, I think you're a perfect example of all those things. So if you can like, talk to me about it.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, when I was younger, like there were a lot of things that were tough. Conflict was a common thing. Resources and money was a big concern, and that was part of the magic that you feel when people start giving you. People start giving you money, people start giving you attention. Like if you've been sort of creatively kneecapped in the past, to suddenly get a bunch of people who seem to really love what you're doing is exhilarating. Um, but it can also very quickly become addicting. And I think that's a line that I've had to dance with a lot in my journey so far, is figuring out how to interact with that thing and to take the good and the joy and the magic, but to not get sort of obsessed with it. And it's really hard because, I mean, my experience is that there seems to be a massive population of the world that is kind of functionally addicted to all of that, and we treat it as normal, and we treat it as, the definition of success. And so it's really easy to just fall into that pattern when you're surrounded by people who think like that. But also, like for me, an example of that was that, when I started getting called to DP things and people are like, here's, $1,000, $1,500, bring in camera and stuff, $2,000, $3,000 a day, whatever it is. No prep work, no post work. I just show up, make it look good and leave. That little kid part of me that had worried so much about money sort of had this feeling that I couldn't say no, because it was like, who says no to $5,000 for this? Like, I would be an idiot. I would be disrespecting myself. I would be disrespecting everyone who doesn't have access to this. And so there was this like feeling inside of me that was like, it is my obligation almost that I have to take all of this opportunity that's in front of me. And the funny thing about that is that that's really just a clever form of a scarcity mindset, right? That it's like, oh, I need to eat as much as possible at the buffet while the buffet's here because the buffet might go away. And so for me, I would cancel family plans. I would, skip out on stuff with my wife. Like I would basically try to blow off anything I could for the combination of the sort of like emotional validation of being told that I was really good at what I was doing, and the physical validation of being like, okay, I get a bunch of money out of this. And so I, for a period of my life, lost all sense of grounding. I lost all sense of myself. I got totally sucked into the content game, the clout game, the money game in a way that was super unhealthy for me. And this was, back when I was doing a lot more educational stuff. So I had started a podcast, and it was like 10 episodes in. We did an episode with Greg Fraser, who had just shot a Solo at that point, and who has since gone on to shoot Dune and the Batman and all this other crazy stuff, and he's an absolute maniac. But then like Greg is like texting me, which is like, you talk about an ego trip too, like just like the weirdest thing. I'm like sitting there and Greg's like, what do you think about the skin tones on a digital Sputnik light versus a sky panel? And I'm like, don't you have Oscars to win or something? Like, why are you texting me right now? But like he introduced me to Bradford Young, who's another incredible cinematographer. And so like I'm getting pulled into all of these really incredible things, but I had no ability to say no to anything. I had no ability to set boundaries. I was really unskilled at delegating. And so I was like running my DP life. I was running this podcast. I had 2 Patreons. I had a Facebook group with a couple thousand people in it. I had a YouTube channel. And I sort of had everything I thought I wanted, but I was like dying on the inside. And so I remember there was one night that I was talking to a friend, and it's funny because it's such a clear like articulation of that wound, that scarcity wound in some ways. Because I remember telling him, I was like, dude, I don't know what to do. Like I made $50,000 this month, which I didn't know was possible. I have all the Instagram followers I ever wanted. Like I have people paying for my lighting breakdowns. I have, this, that, and the other thing. I own an RE camera, which I never thought was going to be possible. I'm like going to work from Walmart and Apple and all these different things. And I hate my life right now. Like I just hate everything about it. And that was sort of the initial crack, I think, in the armor for me of going like, something's not right internally. And I don't know that any of these external things are actually problems, but like I don't have the skills to like navigate them in a healthy way. And then, a few months later, I woke up and was supposed to go on vacation with my wife for 2 weeks to Florida. And she was like, I don't want to go with you because like I just don't know who you are anymore, and like you're always in another planet and you're never present. And it was like a really big confusing wake-up call for me. Like it felt a lot like a slap in the face, because I was like, what do you mean? Like I'm the man, everyone loves me, I'm super successful, I'm providing, I'm creative, like I'm allowing us to do all these cool things in our life. But realizing that like I wasn't relating to other people well, and that I wasn't even necessarily relating to myself well. And so that was, when I started going like, okay, maybe I have to go to therapy. Maybe I have to engage with some of these things from my childhood that I had really repressed and thought that was dealing with it. Which I think is a common experience too, that it's like, you learn how to sort of buckle up. You learn how to not be sad or angry or whatever else. Like for me, I internalized when we were going through everything with our family, like, people would come ask my mom, like, how are things going? And she's like, oh, things are crazy, but God's got us, we're fine. And I remember feeling like I'm not fine, but apparently I'm supposed to be fine. So I'm just going to pretend to be fine. And I think that pattern of like pretending to be fine was one of the big things that just carried forward into all of these ways that I wasn't fine, but I didn't even know how to admit that I wasn't fine. I didn't know how to say,
Wow.
hey, this doesn't feel good. I didn't know how to say no to things. I was just like, the thing that works for me is that I figure out complicated things. I don't fail. I don't feel hard things, and like I just keep trucking, and people get value out of me because I can teach them things, I understand things, and like I had to really unravel that whole narrative. And so I basically had like this big, I call it my come to Jesus moment, even though there's really nothing like religious about it. But I remember I was driving home from couples therapy one day, and I felt like I had this really clear fork in the road that was like, I can either get a divorce, move to LA, carry forward all that I'm carrying, take the momentum, double down on being this like, you know, Yeezy wearing cinematographer, fuckboy sort of thing, or I can burn it all down and start over. And for whatever reason, I decided to burn it all down and start over. And so I went online. I archived the Facebook group. I deactivated our blog. I shut down both my Patreons. I archived the podcast. I deleted all my Instagram followers. And I was like, I'm just taking a month off, and I have to figure out who the heck I am again. Which was interesting because in that moment, understandably, I got a lot of flack from people who were just like, what the heck is going on? Like, people were angry at me, which I didn't really understand or know how to deal with, and which was honestly also overwhelming. Like, I had people who were like, how would you, delete this group? I'm going to make sure you never work in this industry again. I had some kid who messaged me and was like, hey man, like, I just wanted you to know that I really looked up to you, and like, you unfollowing me makes me feel like crap, and that really sucks. And I was like, dude, I literally unfollowed everyone. Like, there's nothing personal about any of this, but it's just, you're in all this emotional turmoil at that moment. And in many ways it felt like killing your baby is like the only way I could describe it. It's like, I just spent the last 6 or 7 years building all of this, and I'm just going to like come up to it with a knife to its throat and just slowly slit everything and walk away. And so it was really hard. And it was really weird because it was this really clear sense of like, I didn't know who I was without all of that. I didn't know how to even conceptualize myself without thinking of myself as like a cinematographer, DP. I'm like, who is Evan without any of this? And so, yeah, I basically like walked away from everything. And that was when I was like, I'm going to work on getting emotionally healthier, and I'm going to work on getting physically healthier, because I was like 260 pounds. And that's right around that picture, actually, that I show Matt, the black and white picture of me at the beginning. That was the night before Mandy told me that she wasn't going to Florida with me. And so that was just like peak bloated, heavy, stressed, like fried version of me. And so that's when I was like, I got to get fit, and, found the Road to the Game stuff. And, that led to a whole path of CrossFit and endurance sports, and whatever it was. 2 years later, to your point, I'm sure you had a similar experience, but being at the games in the RV park and just being like, I'm in the movie now. What the heck is going on? Like, these are all the people from the movies, and now I'm here and they're asking me questions. Like, it was so surreal. But yeah, I think that like, for me, something that's become a really important part of my journey is just like honesty about where you're at. And like, I grew up in a very sort of like, I don't know, I describe it as like a controlling Christian religious environment where it felt like no one was ever really honest about anything. There was this whole veneer of, we make everything look good, we make everything sound good. We like silently judge people who are honest about what's going on in their lives. And I never really sat well with that. And I feel like as I've gone through different seasons of life, I've just found different opportunities to continue to find a way to be honest, because it is, for whatever reason, really hard sometimes to be honest about how you feel, to be honest about what you're struggling with.
For sure.
And when I grew up and didn't have people who were ever doing that, even it made me feel like you weren't supposed to feel those things. And so for me in my journey now, it's been like, I want to help people see that it's okay to feel these things. It's okay to not be okay. And so, you know, that's even led, I think, to a lot of the documentary and storytelling work I've done in the last few years, like, you know, in the arena where it was like, I felt personally like a lot of CrossFit storytelling had become pretty plasticky. And I was like, I feel like we need something that feels honest in here again, because that was the stuff that I remember really resonating with in the Road to the Games. And so, you know, when Heber and Marston were like, hey, would you be interested in directing basically like this successor to Road to the Games? What would you want to do? It was like, well, I'd want to make something that feels a lot more emotionally honest and less just like hyphy muscle up montages. Not that there's anything wrong with that stuff, but we got kind of lucky, and I feel bad every time I say it, but like everything that happened ended up being perfect for that.
Yeah. I was just gonna ask you about it because obviously the way that it started is to showcase Chandler as a human and like his success at Granite Games to go to the games and end up being like a different story, right? So if you can expand on that.
Yeah. So you know, through this journey, it was actually, I had done a podcast interview with Heber right before I sort of like burnt my life down. And so we were like sort of staying in touch. He had invited me to come out. They were looking for help with the 2019 games because that was right after they had gotten let go, and they were doing buttery stuff but still doing documentary stuff. So I went out and was shooting with them there. And we had just sort of like been in touch. We'd done a few things together over the years, and it was like 2 or 3 times Heber had brought up this idea of like, would you be interested in doing more doc stuff? Because like we want to do it, but we're really busy with all this other stuff. We have a ton of like access and everything else, and we have people who would want to watch this stuff, and we feel like you could do it. And so it finally came together that he was like, we would love to do something at semis this year. And he was sort of like, creative freedom, you can do whatever you want. We support it. It needs to be like 15 minutes long for YouTube. It would come out on our Patreon first. And so like, who would you want to cover? And we were waiting for like the semifinal allocations because we didn't have budget to go international. So it was like, who's actually going to be where at this point? Because it's also at whatever point in CrossFit continually remapping how the whole thing works. It was just like, we didn't know exactly what was going on. But I had met Chandler the year before at another video with the guys at CompTrain. And we had really, I feel like, connected right away. I wrestled, he wrestled. We both grew up in, you know, very Christian-y households and had a lot of funny references to things like Veggie Tales and whatever else. And, you know, I think if I would say that I felt like we both had this sense of having a hard time accepting all that we had accomplished, like this sort of sense of self-consciousness around that. And I felt like I could see that in a lot of how he presented himself on social media, and that he would say these sort of self-deprecating things. And it was interesting because I was like, I totally resonate with that. And I don't know, like, it feels so clear that I see it in you, but I don't know how to navigate it in myself. And so when we got the opportunity to do this doc, I was like, Chandler would be a really cool person to do it with. He's also based at CompTrain, so like we could film some stuff before the event. But you know, at that point he was the #1 seed in North America. It's like the plan is that he's going to go crush it. And so in my mind, the story was going to be Chandler goes out, destroys everyone, and still doesn't feel good about himself. And how can we talk about that? And the experience of going like, you're winning everything and you still don't feel good. And the other aspect being the outside voices thing of, you know, seeing him at Rogue and commentators being like, that's the ugliest clean I've ever seen. Like, what's your internal dialogue like around all these people who sort of have opinions about what you're doing, right? And so that was my main curiosity, and talked to him about it. And, you know, he was into it. But, you know, I think a little hesitant, just like was sort of, I think he had this sense of like needing to keep his appearances up. And I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with. I've definitely struggled with. But so I think there was a little bit of him that was just like, yeah, I'm down, but I don't know how much is going to come out of that. And long story short, we get to Granite Games, and day one, event one, he has this like catastrophic blow up that just like should not have happened. He's falling on handstand walks. He looks like he's having trouble breathing. And no one knew what was going on, honestly. Like, being inside it was like no one knew what was going on. I would go talk to Ben, and he's like, I don't know if he's having an asthma attack or if he's having a panic attack. I don't know if he's stressed about all the pressure, like, what's going on. Really, I think the leading thought at that point was that he was having some sort of panic attacks.
Yeah.
And for me at that point, it's like, okay, this is really interesting. And like, I just want to stay present with him and his experience. And we had already decided, when I talked to Toby, I was like, I don't really want to focus on the event or the competition. We're not going to focus on scores. We're not going to film any other athletes. We're entirely focused on Chandler's experience of going through an event like this, because we don't really get to see the athlete side of it. We get to see the highlight reel. We get to hear about what happened, but what's it like to actually go through it as an athlete? And so at that point, we just end up pulling the thread, but every day it's like he would leave at the end of an event, and, we weren't really talking. It was sort of this like silent relationship where he would come back and I would just start filming, but we wouldn't really say anything. And so I was always like, he might not come back, So we get through the weekend. He ends up finishing 11th. He doesn't qualify for the games for the first time in forever. And, he was really beat up about it. That the end of the event, it's in the documentary, but he basically says like, I'm sorry I wasted you guys' time, and none of this is going to be usable anymore. And to me, that became the new theme, was like, why do we think that the story has to be about winning? Why do we collectively have this idea that the story has to be about winning? And that became sort of the new framing device, was like, let's tell a story where we acknowledge at the beginning that this guy doesn't win, and acknowledge that that's so countercultural that you almost don't know why you would watch it, and now you have to watch it because it's like, well, what's the story then?
Yeah.
And so it was only 2 or 3 weeks later, I was like, hey, can we come and do an interview and sort of help glue together some of these pieces? Because there wasn't a lot of actual dialogue over the weekend. And it was during that interview that it came out that he was like, oh, I've had asthma since I was a little kid. That's actually why I got into CrossFit. I wanted to be special forces, and I wanted to be so fit that I could get through basic having an asthma attack. So I started doing CrossFit. But I've never told anyone because I felt bad about it. I felt like I was cheating to get in the Army. I felt like people were going to say that my inhaler was somehow performance enhancing. And so I've literally like hidden my inhaler for my whole career as I've gone around to events and had stuff like this happen, because I felt like it wasn't okay. And it was such like a weirdly just like clear moment of like, oh, this is the whole story. Like, I think everyone can relate to that.
Yeah.
But he didn't want to put it in the movie, to be honest. He was like, we shouldn't put that in there. Like, I still don't want that public. And I was like, dude, we have that. This is the story. Like, there is no story without this piece, which is a funny, it's a funny aspect of this job, is finding that balance of like being that safe space, being that totally open space, and just being able to be curious and pull people's truth out of them, but also sometimes having to be a little bit of like, we're gonna do this and it's gonna be okay. Like there's this little bit of like having to push people past their own comfort zone, because I think at that moment in time, the most comfortable thing for him is to leave that still secret. And so there's this little bit of push and pull that has to happen to go like, this is important, it's worth sharing. This is important, it's worth sharing. And eventually, having to defer still though, to where I was like, at the end of the day, I can't release this without you being okay with it. So like, I need you to tell me that this is okay. But I think this is really powerful. I think it's really going to help people connect with you. It helps me really connect with you. I relate to it myself. And he was like, okay, fine. But he hadn't watched it yet. He wouldn't watch it until after it came out. He had like so much anxiety around it.
Really? Wow.
And so it came out, and the response was, incredible and insane. And I think it was like 24 hours later, I forget if he called me or texted me, but he was just like, you were right. And that, to me, those are like some of the most magic moments in storytelling. Absolutely. Is like when you get to find those like beliefs we have about ourselves, those moments of shame, those things that we can't be in the world, and really get to reveal them both for the person in the story, but also for everyone else watching. Because I think that's where the connection is when you get to go like, oh, I have felt that way about things about myself, and maybe I don't
That's right.
have to, that you're able to actually see that part of yourself with compassion now. And so that's one of my favorite things in filmmaking.
Absolutely. And I remember watching the documentary, and it just it felt like fresh, like something new. Because as you said, like we're used to like seeing stuff in sports that is highlighting like, yeah, this person won, like just the highlight reels as you were talking about. But we rarely get to see like the human side of like each athlete, and that's something that I've seen more in the last few months than ever. Like people really trying to highlight the human side of the athletes, because I mean, if you want me to be honest, that's like what people feel, that connection that resonates to. Like, yes, like we know that Max Verstappen is the fastest F1 racer in the world. Like he wins every race, but like it would really I would really love to see how's his life outside of like F1, like racing, because I already
Mm-hmm.
know he's the best one. I already know that there's a 95% chance he's gonna win. If somebody will release a documentary about it, like his life outside racing for the past 2 years, I bet it will be a huge hit, because I mean, we don't know things he struggles with. Like we might find some sort of like connection to things that he struggles with, that he, even though he wins every race, he maybe still gets nervous right before the race. He still
Totally.
has those bad voices inside his head that, he might, that last race might be the last race that he won ever,
Right.
and that's how that documentary felt like. It felt like something different. It felt like we actually get to see the human aspect of somebody, not only like a great athlete, but somebody people look up to, and then we get to see his honest reaction of when things don't go his way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't remember last time that I saw a documentary that the the athlete that, like the person that you were, the whole documentary about that person, he didn't win. Like it all the time, every documentary is like, oh, we're gonna follow this person and he wins, and holds a trophy, and it's great. Like we
Mm-hmm.
love to see that, but the human side of it and feeling that connection, that's like a complete different feeling.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's like my belief is that like we all love highlight reels, right? Like we all love winning. And that's where I don't want people to get the sense that like I'm against that at all. But I think that like with the reality of the varied positions that we're all in our lives at any given moment, it's like the valleys are often the things that we can all relate on, because the valleys are the same no matter what level you're at. Like it's a lot harder to relate to the guy who's like, "Oh, I didn't close my like $2.4 million deal today." And then you're like, "Oh, must be hard." But like when you are in those human moments and you see the ability of that person to experience the depths of themselves, the valley of the experience, the emotional complexity of it, and to still go out and do what it is they do, that's where we're able to take that back into ourselves and go like, oh, I thought that like I couldn't, like a really practical example that came out was there was a kid, I guess, who saw in the arena and basically like I don't know if he was 11 or 12, but like mapped the story onto himself and was like, oh, I normally like hate school and don't want to engage with it, whatever else, but like seeing Chandler do CrossFit with his asthma makes me feel like I can do this thing myself with like my own struggles with it.
Mm.
And that kid ended up going to Rogue and had a sign that was like, it's Chandler time at Rogue.
Yep, I've,
um,
I've seen that sign.
it's so sick, but it's like the I think we all aspire on some level. We love to see the people who are great, but the connection to the greatness is only made deeper by seeing the actual reality of what surrounds it.
Yeah.
And so for me, like that's a very important part of storytelling is like, yes, let's talk about the mountaintops. Yes, let's have the sick event montage. Let's put some hyphy music, but like where are we getting an actual connection that people can actually experience and feel? because I think that's the thing that then actually leads people into their own actions too in their life, where like, at least for me, if I just go watch like a hype thing, a lot of times like, oh, it's cool, but I'm not going to do anything about that. Right. Like I'm like, oh, it's great that OBJ can go do what he does. I don't do that. But when you have that actual like connection opportunity, then whatever it is, whether it's, oh, I'm going to go do my art, I'm going to go make a video, I'm going to go to my job and interact with clients today, you know, whatever your world is, to be able to take that emotional, tangible element of it and bring it back into your life. To me, that's like the impact that I felt was missing in a lot of the commercial work I've been doing for a long time. And it's one of the things that I've been really intentional about bringing back into everything that we do now, is going like, how do we reconnect people to their feelings, to the reality of their experience, to their own, you know, fundamental enoughness, to their own fundamental creativity, and really just allow them to be who they are, where they are, and to keep their journey going, rather than contributing to the, you know, the epidemic of people feeling inadequate, disconnected, like they're not supposed to be going through what they're going through, you know, like there's some magic bullet that would fix everything. And, you know, I don't know, I feel like that messaging just gets really overwhelming, and to try and pull people back into their own experience and go like, dude, you got this, like whatever it is for you,
100%.
go do it.
Yeah, 100%. I wanted to backtrack a little bit more. And first of all, the story you shared about, you know, from having it all to, you know, pretty much as that person, the comment said, killing your babies. That it was super powerful. And I really, you know, appreciate you sharing all that with us, because obviously it's very personal stuff. But I wanted to talk about that. So you went from having it all, right? Like, or what you thought it was having it all, this success, Instagram followers. That looking back, it's really, as you said, it's like kind of superficial, right? Like, oh, I have a lot of Instagram followers. But at any point, have you felt any sort of like regret from leaving all that behind and starting like this new from zero?
I mean, you know, there are definitely days where that mental loop starts back up and goes like, oh, you know, the shoulda, coulda, wouldas of like, well, you could have gotten healthier without doing all of that. And maybe you should have kept doing the podcast, or maybe you should have, you know, invested in the educational stuff and just like farmed it all out, and, you know, not made any money off of it, but taken a lot of work off your plate. Like there's all those things that in hindsight you can look at. And for me, like my mind can definitely go down that road. I personally find that my experience is that the reality is that that was what I needed to do to get where I needed to go. And I am a big believer in the idea of no sunk costs. Like I think that one of the most valuable things about how I show up in life is that I think the past is all sort of largely irrelevant, right? Like it's like you're here now.
Yeah.
And so for better or worse, it's like I'm someone who always bets it all on black. And at that moment, it's like I'm going to bet it all on me getting healthy, because in the long run, the so to speak, the ROI of that is like exponentially higher than trying to balance these things and it not working out. And so, you know, there are definitely those moments of going through that sort of dark night of the soul and being like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if this is going to work out. Like, I don't know if everyone hates me now. Did I just ruin my life? Did I ruin my life even more by being visible? Like if I was a normal person who wasn't visible, you could just do this and it wouldn't be a problem. But now that everyone knows who you are and they just watch you burn your life down publicly, like what's that going to do? And yeah, like all of those thoughts come up. And that's when I just have to come back to the moment of like, where am I? What's here right now? And what are we doing? And how does that feel? And is that in line with who I want to be? Because at the end of the day, you know, I love accomplishments. I love building. I love things that are impactful out in the world. But like after you've done it, it's largely irrelevant. You know, it's like, oh, I deadlifted 500 pounds once. And it's like, okay, cool. the difference between whether I deadlifted 500 pounds or 450 pounds is largely irrelevant. You know, like for me, I'm glad I did it. It's fun. But once it's in the past, it's like, I think it's so easy to get stuck in the past. And like for me, there was this really clear sense of like, yeah, like the money's great, the followers are great, the opportunities are great. But if it isn't all building a cohesive life that feels good, then it's all irrelevant. And so that was when my perspective also changed to being like, I don't really care about any single performance metric. I care about everything being unified into one consistent, healthy experience. And so like at the end of the day, making more money is easy. At the end of the day, losing weight is easy. At the end of the day, you know, a lot of this stuff is easy. The real challenge is doing all of them at the same time. And I think that that is generally going to be a slower game, but a more fulfilling game. And that has sort of been my mission the last few years of going like, at the end of the day, I know how to pull money levers. At the end of the day, I know how to make stuff that gets views. But the fulfilling part of the journey for me is exploring more of the things that I love, and that those things can be a part of it, and I don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but that I can build from a foundation of what I love, that I can build in a direction of what I care about. And I think for me, a large portion of that earlier phase of my life, I was caught up in the trap of building towards what other people said was valuable, even when it didn't super resonate with me and what I wanted my life to look like. Wow. And so that's where, like, if I could give you 100,000, if I give you 1 million Instagram followers tomorrow who are all like big foodies and you got to be a food influencer, it's like, do you want that? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But like, I think we just think of like, the number doesn't mean anything outside of a context where you're actually doing what you want. And that for me was a part of it, was like, okay, I need to figure out how to have an identity that's not all film education. And so that was part of why I went and ended up starting over on Instagram, because I was like, my account's all film influencer people anyway, and I don't really want to do all that content anymore. I'm not reviewing gear. And so it was like 20,000 means what? It's just, it's a made up thing, right? And so I'm just going to toss it off and move on to the next thing. And so being able to just sort of like release the emotional attachment, because the accomplishment's valid and your desire to get there was valid and the work you put into it is valid. But sometimes the hardest part of the journey is admitting that you don't love something anymore, that it's not working for you anymore, that it's not what you thought it would be, and that you don't have to keep doubling down on it. It's like you can just walk away. And I think a lot of people keep doubling down on things they don't love because they feel like that's what they're supposed to do. And there's definitely pain in walking away, but in the long run, there's so much more satisfaction.
Dude, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing. And it's something that if anybody listening, you're just getting started in this industry, I really think you need to like grab that like maybe listen to it 2 times, because it's something that they might go through. They might go through that point that they start getting more than they thought they were gonna get, and they're gonna start feeling that sense of like, you know, I have it all. Let's get more, and then you start forgetting about the things that actually make you happy and the things that are important in life. And me myself, I've struggled with that in the past. I don't know, 6 months since last year, and I briefly talked to you about it at the beginning of the year when I had to say no to one of the good opportunities that I got this year. And it's because my mind wasn't there. Like, I got this great opportunity. I was going to be out of town for another 7-8 days. And I just didn't see myself doing it. Like, it was a great opportunity, something that, you know, in the past, if you would have told me 3 years ago, I would have been like, that's never going to happen. But I felt like at that point, I was almost to the point that I was completely burned out. I've been traveling a lot. I haven't been home for a while. And then it was going to be like a day off. And then those 7 to 8 days out of town, and then traveling right after that, it just, my mind wasn't there. And I wasn't going to do a job that I know that I wasn't going to go give my 100%, and my mind wasn't going to be there. And one of the things that I remember is that me talking to you about it, like I told you about this opportunity, and that I had to say no. Most people will be like, "Oh man, that sucks," but you'll get more opportunities. You asked me about the way I felt. Oh, how does it make you feel? And I'm like, wow, like it's a perspective that not everybody, you know, goes through. Like most people just like, oh, that sucks, whatever. Like hopefully I get another opportunity, but you always go straight into more more deep and like what's important for you, right? And what I felt at that moment is that it might have been like a dopamine rush for that week,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't gonna be something that at the end of the day was gonna make me happy, and that what I'm looking for, which is longevity in this industry, that might be one of the weeks that make me completely stop it all because
Mm-hmm.
I just know that mentally I was not in a good mindset. But yeah, I feel like a lot of people are gonna go through that. Like if you're if you're new in this industry and you start getting to the point that you're feeling that momentum, like really take care of the things that are important to you and that are important for you to keep this career as long as you can. Like I would rather have you know 20% less money a year but do it for 15 more years, or 40 more years, than make a ton of money and after 5 years be like, I'm done with this, I'm never
Mm-hmm.
gonna do it again. I hate photography, I hate videography, I want to like do something different. um and yeah, it's tough, but I feel like the more you talk to people about these kind of things, and the more you open up about the way you feel with people like you, for example, they can help you get a different perspective about how things work. And it's not all, oh, it's a great experience because people are gonna be like, oh my god, like he was doing this and this, and he's making a lot of money. But it's not gonna be something that's good for you, you know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love that. I've totally experienced that myself. A lot of the biggest jobs that I've ever gotten called for, I've had to make the decision not to take. And it hurts. Like it's weird. I don't know about you, but it's like I remember a few years ago I got a call to do this like I don't know his first name, Canelo, the big boxer, this like Jameson thing. And
Canelo Alvarez.
yeah, I think so. And it was gonna be this like huge Jameson campaign, whatever. And we had some family stuff going on or something. And I think I was also coming back from like another travel job, so it would have been like instead of being gone for a week and then home for a few days and then gone again, I would have just been gone for like a month. And it was like, okay, I have to say no. Um, and there's a real like grief that can come in the back of that sometimes. And I think that it can be really easy to explain that away in our heads too. And I've,
Yeah, there's no way I can explain it. Just it's a different feeling of like, what if, like, could have I pushed it one more week?
right.
But yeah,
And it's like, I don't know. I think it's sort of like I was talking to some friends recently who had a miscarriage. And the guy was saying that he was like, I didn't expect this to hurt as much as it did because in my head it wasn't really real, right? It's like you didn't have a kid, you didn't have anything. Like it was all just a possibility in your mind, and I don't know why this hurts so bad. And I feel like I've felt the same way about a lot of things, but I've learned that it's okay to feel the pain of it, and even for him just being like, feel whatever it is you feel right now. Like you were in a world of real possibility. Like even if it wasn't real, tangible, real, it was a real possibility. You had the meeting that's like, hey, you're going to be a dad, and your body and your mind and everything started getting prepared, and then that goes away and you have to grieve that a little bit. And I think that, or a lot of it. And as creatives, there are opportunities that come along that are sort of like having a kid again, right? Where it's like, oh, I just got a call to go to the event that I've always wanted to go to, or to work with the personality that I've always looked up to, or whatever else the thing may be. Um, and for some reason, to have to say no to that or it not working out, like there's a very real sense of grieving in that. And a lot of people will try to explain it away and will say, oh, it'll be, it'll be fine. You'll get to the next one, whatever else. And that was one of the things, just talking to my friend about the miscarriage, is like, you don't have to catastrophize it. Like, you don't have to tell some story that this is the end of the world. And you also don't have to explain it away and be like, everything works out for good. And, you're another one's going to come around. Like, just be with what it is right now. It's not the end of the world. It's not all okay. It sucks. It hurts. And like, that's okay. And it's sort of like the athletic reality, I think, too, of being like, okay, we're here. We're in the pain cave right now. Whatever. You're doing like a fan bike thing. And it's like, I'm not dying. I don't feel great. And that's okay. We're just here, and I don't have to let my mind go down the like, oh no, what if our lungs collapse and whatever else. And I also don't necessarily have to create some super positive narrative right now. I can just be here.
Yeah.
And
Just
that
feel
was
your
a lesson
emotions.
that was really hard for me, because I was really uncomfortable being in any sort of discomfort. So I'd rather just explain it away than feel it. But I've found that feeling it is a lot healthier in the long run.
100%. Talking about it helps so much too. Just finding somebody that you feel comfortable with, and just talking about those things, like it can help you in so many ways. Like the worst thing that I've noticed is when I keep things to myself. If I'm sad or I'm going through something, I just keep it to myself, because that's kind of like the natural thing that we do. We just kind of just put ourselves in this like cube of like no feelings. I'm not gonna show any feelings to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived for most of my life like that. I think in the past 2 years is the when I started like expressing the way I feel and talking to friends and reaching out to friends, and asking friends how they're doing too, because they go through the same. And it has helped me in so many ways that, I mean, I can't even explain it. It's just emotionally, it just I feel better. Like I feel like I still struggle with showing. I feel like I'm a very emotional person that still not at a point that I feel that I have full vulnerability with the world. Like I still feel like I hide a lot of my emotions. But I remember since I was a kid, I was somebody that felt my emotions really hard. And talking to friends and people that are very vulnerable, they've taught me that it's okay to just express your feelings and talk to people about that. And even in my career, it's helped me a lot just to talk about things that are not going well, or things that are going really well too. Like um, I'm in a spot right now in my life that I'm happy with, like, how things are going. Um, I feel like I found a good spot of like the amount of work that I can do for a specific period of time without feeling that like sense of like I'm losing passion or burnout and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. And the reason why, it's because I've been very open about the way that I feel with some people, and they've, you always like get different things from each people, and I apply it to my life, and it's been great. And just, talking to you about all these things is that it's incredible, because you're somebody that, I look up to, obviously, and you opening up in my podcast, it means a lot. So I really wanted to thank you for that.
Dude, thank you. I'm so grateful for all that you're doing, and the work to have these conversations. As someone who's been on that side of it, I know like how much work it is and how little credit it can feel like you get. So thank you so much for all you're doing to create that space for people, and to tell those stories, because it is part of the healing that we're all going through, and coming back to being able to be ourselves without our minds playing a bunch of crazy games with us all the time.
Yeah, it's fun. It's definitely something that I feel like it was missing when I was not doing the podcast. I felt like there was something missing for sure. It's just because I feel like every time I have a conversation like this one, for example, it's just like refreshing. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the moment I click Live Studio, I'm gonna go to the kitchen, make some food, and I'm gonna be thinking about things that you say all day. It's like it's just refreshing. Everybody has like a different perspective of like work and life and stuff like that, and I just learn a lot from all of you guys. And the best part of all this is when somebody sends you a DM like, "Hey, I listened to your episode with Evan, and I love that it hey, help me do this and this, and then people like 6 months from now texting you that they got their first gig and they applied whatever they heard on the episode, I don't know, 20. Dude, it's such a good feeling. It's like,
Yeah.
you're doing something that it's helping other people, and at the same time it's helping you. It's kind of like a win-win in both sides.
100%. I mean, those are my absolute favorite things. It's the thing that I miss most about teaching was like just hearing from people like, I went out and, did this thing. I quit my full-time job and I'm freelancing now, or I got my first, music video, whatever it is. Like, those are the coolest, most impactful feeling things to me. And
Yeah.
I've had a hard time coming back to the teaching space. I feel like I probably still have some like trauma there. But it's the best. And the one thing that I do just want to add on to what you're saying that I've been experiencing a lot recently is I totally agree, and I totally value these conversations, being able to share them. I've been having to learn more to also have these conversations just like offline with the people around me. And that may be obvious to tons of people, but there have been big periods of my life where I spend most of my time in my own head when I'm social with other people. You're sort of in the like small talk, whatever loop of just like stuff going on. And then I save all of my like emotional processing to come out on social media. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like I appreciate being able to do that. But it's like, there's so much power in just calling up a friend and hearing that, someone else is going through it. Those conversations and that community is a real secret weapon. And I feel like it's one that in my life, I feel like I let social media replace that for a little while. And it's part of where my mind was getting really crazy and that I wasn't allowing myself to feel things and I wasn't expressing what I was going through. And so like being intentional about building actual community and, being able to share your stories and your experiences and all that stuff online is great. But really like having human to human honesty, I think is like the biggest secret weapon that is sadly so easy to miss these
Yeah.
days.
And that's what Tori says in the comments, that that's the greatest impact, human side of it. But so 1 hour and 37 minutes, we went a little bit over. I really appreciate you, Evan, for taking your time and doing this. Before we cut it though, I want to know what's next for you.
What's next for me? That's a good question. I've got like a lot of potential irons in the fire right now, to be honest. So I'm in this season of just like, really, to everything we're saying, trying to center into like what is really important right now. Because like I've been having a conversation around a sort of like part-time consulting gig, which could be very cool, could suck a lot. It's like an exciting opportunity to have more just like consistent baseline revenue and not be so worried about the feast and famine that is running a business. But then like there's some other really exciting creative projects also in the pipeline. And so just sort of weighing out like, what are we going to do, and having to actually sit with those things and figure out what the next chapter is. I feel like I've been in this like transitional season of knowing that things are changing and like how I'm operating, like what things are going to look like is probably going to change. And just figuring that out, because I love all the like tangible camera stuff, but I really want to continue moving more into like creative direction, leadership, running and producing bigger things again. Post COVID, my world sort of shrunk a lot because I used to travel a lot on these bigger things and that all went away. And so really like the intention for me right now is finding more ways to do bigger projects with teams in whatever capacity I can be of the greatest benefit to those teams. And whether that's just like being a part of creative calls more often and helping people clarify what they're doing, whether that's, running air traffic control on actual productions, whether that's directing, like it's always taken a lot of different forms for me. And so I feel like what I've really been working on getting clarity on is just like, what is the core valuable thing that I can best help people with right now? because once I know that, then you can have different forms that it takes and different, you know, lanes that it plays out in. But instead of focusing on like a title or a output, I'm sort of focusing on like what's the thing that I can help people transform in this next season of life.
Awesome. There he goes, Evan Bourcier. If somebody wants to reach out to you or something, Instagram will be best way.
Yeah, Instagram's good. My email's on my website too, so you can hit me up there, whatever works.
This Instagram is at @eBourcier. So just E as in Evan, and then BOURCIER. There it is.
There it is.
So follow him, send him a message. If you listen to the episode, let him know. And thank you, Evan, so much. I appreciate it. And hopefully in the future I can have you again for part 2.
Dude, I would be so down anytime.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Again, this episode was recorded live. We're going to post it on Spotify and all the platforms in the next few days. Again, we're just getting started again. So we're still trying to figure out the timeline of things, if we're going to post the episode right away. But yeah, definitely. And thanks for everybody for listening. And next episode, it's going to be next week. Evan, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Love you all.